Okay, it's live now.
Right, good evening everyone, and welcome to the final of the Logo Johnston 2024. I'm Cale, and I'm joined by Rob, my co-host this evening. First of all, can I just get a big congratulations for everyone that reached the stage? And second of all, I'd just like to give a big thank you to our host, MC, the Crown Solicitor in Auckland. It's fantastic to be able to use their facilities and so you come up here and have a lovely evening of drinks and food and a lovely evening of debating as well. First of all, I will introduce the teams. So, opening government, we have Manat and Henry. We'll clap for each of them. Closing government, Rob and Joe. Melissa and Amelia opening opposition. Closing opposition, James and Eve. I'll hand over to Robert to introduce our panel for this evening.
All right, well, thanks everyone for coming. I'm sure this is going to be an excellent debate. It's my privilege to introduce the panel for tonight. So we have some very excellent judges judging this final. We have Judy and Ella, who are accredited the regular way, so congratulations to them. We have Grace, who are accredited via the break. She is a major lottery winner, so. And we have Shah, who were accredited so long ago, I'm not sure anyone quite remembers how it happened.
Amazing panel and amazing speakers. So, what is the motion this evening? Probably everyone's wondering. This House, as a young adult in a secular community, would turn to religion instead of doomerism.
And for those of you unfamiliar, doomerism is extreme pessimism and fatalism about global problems due to increasing amounts of conflicts, socio-political issues, and ecological devastation. And this ideology has been rising in popularity.
We're in for a thrilling debate. I'd like to welcome the Prime Minister to open the debate.
Look, frankly, at the end of the day, we think that you're going to be better off if you spend your time thinking that you've accepted the word of God or any God of any religion that you choose, rather than spending all of your time worrying, debilitated by anxiety, over the future of the world, as gloomy as it may seem, in the conditions that we have going on at the moment. So in our case, we're going to outline how turning to religion rather than doomerism is going to support your immediate health and make you happier and better off in the long term. Okay, so firstly, on some points of setup. We think that secular communities in this debate look like places where there's a politically secular government, and we think that there's no predominant religion in a secular community. This doesn't necessarily mean there is no religion. It simply means that there's not one that dominates the thoughts of that entire community. We think that finding communities where there is no religion simply isn't a situation that applies to much of the world, and so it isn't really relevant to talk about here. No, thank you. We also like to say that we think that people who choose to join religion, and we'll get onto that in a second, are generally not going to join the most extreme religions. And this is for a couple of reasons. If you're coming from a non-religious standpoint, getting into the most extreme beliefs is the furthest away from your current position, your current outlook on the world, and therefore it's going to be the hardest for you to convert to these groups. Secondly, these groups are more likely to be exclusionary to people based on their previous lack of religion if they think that this religion is the only way the teachings of this religion to the letter are the only way to be saved in life. We think they're more likely to not want to accept people who haven't been living like this for a certain period of their life. Okay, Next thing to address is that this is an active debate. So what do we look like as a young adult? Well, we think that what we really care about is personal gratification and realization. We think this looks like, having money, having a place to live, being able to opt into healthy relationships that are sustainable with people who make you feel good about yourself and your place in the world. And why is this important? Well, we think fundamentally this is what makes you happy, right? If you're constantly worrying about being able to eat or having shelter, this is bad. And if you're constantly worried about the future of your ability to do these things, we think this is also harmful because you're going to be thinking about these future risks. Yes, that point.
Most people in secular societies are not religious. How are you therefore more likely to get meaningful personal fulfillment if you simply have less people that you can discuss your personal inner workings of your mind with?
Look, we think that fundamentally, even if you're a religious person, you can still have very meaningful connections with people who aren't religious. And as I'm going to talk about, we think the comparative looks like closing yourself off to people. And we think one of the dangers of a doomerist secular society is that because you don't see opportunity in the future, you devalue investment into future relationships, future assets, future problems. Therefore, you're less likely to get out, interact with people, and have these relationships anyway. So even if it restricts your community, which we don't think it does, you're still better off on our side of the house. This is an active debate, and we'd like to reiterate, we think that your care about the state of the world is likely relatively symmetric on either side of the debate. And this is because if you're a doomerist, this is likely because you're seeing things like climate change, things like wars going on all over the world, and this is making you feel like the world is heading in a bad direction that's not going to give you a good future. We think equally, if you're religious, you're likely subscribing to teachings that tell you to care about how other people are doing, care about their state of life. But we think that crucial, and we think that you're also interacting with very similar media that talks about these kind of things. Where the difference comes in is how you respond to this media, how you respond to these issues in the world, and how you act after that. So we tell you that under our side of the house, what you have is when you see a problem in the world, you are given options that make you feel like you're making a meaningful difference. This might mean praying for yourself, for other people, which you feel is going to make their life better and makes you feel good about what you're doing for the world. It makes you feel like there is a chance that things are going to get better. We also think you're more likely to get engaged with donations, charity drives, all of these kinds of things, because again, this is what, because you're told that these things will make a difference, and even if those small human actions don't make the largest difference, there is a divine influence that will help to compound on the actions that you take yourself and will ultimately make things okay. And at the very end of the day, for yourself, you have the promise that if you're engaging in these activities, that you have some sort of afterlife or salvation at the end of the day to look forward to. And we think that that's something that helps get you out of bed in the morning, helps you get out there and do things with your day that are positive for yourself and your own mental health, and also positive for other people. And we think at the very least this has a placebo effect for you, just thinking that there is someone who is looking out for you at the end of the day. So what's the comparative to doomerism? Well, we think that you don't feel like you can do anything about these global events. This is the pessimism that the MOOC was talking about. And so what does this mean? It means that you think that in the future, right, climate change is going to get worse. You think that that houses are going to be harder to buy, there's going to be less jobs, all of these kind of things as the climate threatens regions of land and exacerbates problems with food, housing, and forces people to more densely populate regions. We also think that you're in a period of your life as a young adult where you're moving away from family, you don't have an established career, you need guidance, and what doomerism is telling you to do is that the future isn't worth investing in, so you should just try to enjoy everything as much as you can now and not worry about the future, not build up those careers, build up those relationships that are going to be beneficial in the future. Close yourself off because relationships aren't going to last long enough or in this new world, and so this is going to ultimately be very harmful for you. We think what this looks like is waking up and seeing that it's raining, right? And all you're seeing is the effect of climate change when the torrential Auckland rain comes in 2 seconds. Or even if it's a very hot sunny day, again, it's just the effects of climate change getting worse as our climate degrades. And we think that constantly having these issues thrust into your face is going to be really bad for you. And the comparative to the placebo effect that we get at our very worst is that on the opposition side, they must accept this kind of spiral where people are less likely to invest in their future events, and as events get worse, they're likely to become more pessimistic, and they have to address this if they want to win. Okay, so what are a few other benefits? Well, we think that religion is going to introduce routine. It's going to bring you out to prayer. It's going to get you into constant interactions and take you out of your shell. It's going to give you people to interact with constantly to build those meaningful relationships with. what does like the outcome look like in the future? Well, we think again, if you're willing to invest in relationships, invest in building a career, and be engaged in the world, you're more likely to wake up in a situation 5-10 years in the future where you have a roof over your head, you have shelter, you feel like you have a purpose in life, and you feel like you have salvation coming at the end of the day. And for all of these reasons, you're just fundamentally going to be happier than if you think that the entire world is going in the wrong direction. And that is why the MOVE must stand. Thanks.
Panel ready for the next speaker? In between speakers, I'd take a chance to talk a little bit about our host, MC. So, first of all, I'd just like to say that MC's areas of expertise cover every type of litigation. So, from dispute resolution and legal advice, especially they emphasise that they act where the private sector meets the public sector. And so, their type of work they're involved with ranges from property, immigration, public policy, and major transactions. So, without further ado, I'd like to now invite the deputy leader of the opposition to continue the debate.
Sorry, 2 seconds. We got a lot of paper and there's not a whole lot of spread out room. I think in an age where everyone has pretty much agreed that everything is somewhat going terribly, it is pretty clear that doomerism is going to be a life mentality, kind of like a philosophy of life that is going to allow people to accept themselves and engage with other people and the world that they're in much, much better. Okay, 2 main things in this speech today. I'll start with some setup and then I'll move into our 2 main contributions on personal fulfillment and then social connection. Note that these are the 2 most important points in this debate. This is an actor debate, as opening already told you. This means that this debate should be judged on the context of how a young person, the actor, is going to be fulfilled. We think that that looks like personal satisfaction with your life and with your purpose and like with everything that you're doing as a whole. And secondly, how well you're able to socialize with others. This is very well proven to be important to mental health, and it also influences your perception of yourself. I think this is pretty unique framing, and it's going to be used throughout the debate. Really important here. Okay, moving on to some setup, I'd just like to talk first about what it looks like to be in a secular community. Note that as you've already been told, this looks like the majority of people are not part of a religion, and the obvious consequence of that is a large majority of people aren't as accepting or as comfortable with engaging with religious philosophy. It's not something that they engage with. It's historically created a lot of pressure on different groups of people. It tends to be something that isn't talked about very much. It's seen as very individual. Secondly, note that this is going to influence people's choice of religion. People are more likely to choose religions that are visible to them and that they're engaging with. Note that this looks like either they're going to engage in really mainstream religions like Christianity that are surrounding them, or also notably religions which are putting effort into converting people, which are creating that pressure. I think that's really important in understanding the context of how this religion is going to look like. Finally, on setup, we just want to talk briefly about how a young person is going to be interpreting both of these, what it's going to look like in their lives. Religions, on the one hand, they have a lot of rules to follow. They often need education. They need guidance. There's also time and resources that go into being part of a religion. You have to go do group prayer, group worship, that sort of thing. You have to go certain places. Often, in some cases, they'll even require contributions financially or in your time. We think that's quite a lot to demand from people. On the other hand, doomerism is just a personal belief system. Yes, you can still engage with people. People do talk about their doomerism, but it is something that just happens to be how people want to live their lives. Okay, moving on to our first point now on personal fulfillment. A little bit of context here. Really, obviously, you're always with yourself. That's why it's really important. You have to live with yourself all of the time. Secondly, as I've already told you, doomerism requires little guidance. Okay, so why do we think that doomerism...
If doomerism requires real guidance, it is obviously impressionable to the fears and anxieties you already have. If you are a particularly anxious person undergoing regular life stresses, do you not think the lack of guidance would cause you to spiral in the most extreme ways, the most extreme nihilistic extents of doomerism?
Okay, well, firstly, I think lack of guidance doesn't necessarily mean that an individual has no social and emotional support networks. That's like quite a high thing to be trying improving. Secondly, as I'm going to be telling you in this point, we think that religion actually creates a lot more pressure on a young and impressionable young person than doomerism, which note that it never says that doomerism, like people are unhappy all the time. Pessimism as a life philosophy means accepting these kind of pessimistic things. We think that's really, really good. Okay, moving into my mechanisms for this point. Firstly, as I've just kind of began to say, it's really comforting to not have a kind of goal. It's this kind of like optimistic nihilism on doomerism side, where you can accept that life is the way that life is, and that means that you are free to live your life the way you want. This creates a lot of choice for people, it creates a lot of opportunity, and it also removes a significant amount of pressure. On the other hand, religion is incredibly, incredibly conditional. They follow a lot of rules, there's a lot of like prescriptions on how you should behave, what you should believe, and inevitably, because they function on this kind of like reward or punishment system, as soon as a person feels or is visibly not being able to follow those behaviors, there's either a perceived like fear of punishment or an actual punishment within the religion. And also note that the religion cannot always yield perceivable, tangible results. And we think that kind of like ties into that concept of pressure, and it means that people who feel like with religion they have a goal, they don't always feel like they're achieving it. On the other hand, doomerism, when there is no goal, there's no way to fail at it. Secondly, on this point, religion is not so universally applicable to all kind of aspects of life. We think doomerism is a really great kind of life philosophy. It means even if on a small side you fail at a test, you're like, oh, it's okay, the world is ending, doesn't really matter, it's not going to ruin my life. So we think it's kind of applicable to all contexts, the little things as well as the big things. Finally, on this point, a little bit more detail on like the pressure that is created by religion being conditional. As I already told you, there's behavior expectations, but also note most major religions have demographic standards. Even if you're talking about like a modern reformed version of a religion that like tries to follow a really progressive code, they're still engaging with quite old, like written a long time ago texts, and they're still associated with a really large amount of like groups that are a lot more orthodox and often a lot more judgmental, especially when it comes to people of color and women. There's a lot of pressure there to either behave a certain way or even like be less valued within the religion. What are the impacts of all of this? So firstly, as we've already told you, you're able to be fulfilled in doomerism no matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you fail a test. It doesn't matter if you don't do the life career that you thought like everyone thought you should do. You are able to be fulfilled because you know that nothing matters. You know that there's absolutely no pressure on you, and this means that you're free to live life the way you want. We think that that gets rid of that kind of like fear and stress that the other team was talking about, because you are just genuinely content with whatever it is that you choose to do. You're also, and this is really, really important in this debate, able to accept yourself because you know that you aren't failing at the religion in any way. Okay, moving on now to my next point about social connection in doomerism. So firstly, the context of this, since the society is really, really secular, we know that people aren't as religious, and we also know that less people are comfortable discussing religion. Okay, why is it better to be doomerist in a secular society? This is really intuitive. The volume of people that are willing to talk to you and engage with your like life philosophy are going to be much greater, and they're also probably going to be more comfortable engaging with you on a deeper level. We think this creates more deep friendships and like more people that you can connect with. Also, as I've already told you, the lack of demographic requirements means it's inclusive to more people, and you're able to engage with more people across the board. Note that people do talk about their doomerism. It's not just an individual thing. It's something people believe in very strongly. It's something they talk about. The impacts of this, you're less likely to be alienated, and you're also less likely to be judged, as I've told you several times throughout this speech, and that means at the end of the day, you're able to get really, really meaningful social interactions, and you live your life better. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that excellent speech. I'd now like to talk about a little bit more about our wonderful host for tonight, and I think it's pretty obvious that MC couldn't function without the amazing people that make it run. It's one of New Zealand's largest litigation firms, and it has a team of over 250 people, of which about 160 are lawyers, 30 are full-time Crown prosecutors, and it has a whole bunch of other people involved in making sure that they can resolve disputes and provide helpful information in every single area of the law. So that being said, I'd now like to invite up the Deputy Prime Minister.
I get to go? The world of the opposition is one where you steal grief from the future. It is one where you wake up without a purpose, you go to sleep without a purpose, and your conversations are dictated by the fact that you believe there is no tomorrow, there's no meaning to tomorrow, there is no purpose to tomorrow. 3 things. On setup, on personal fulfillment, on social. On setup, 3 things to note. Firstly, they tend to push that the secular communities mean there's no one religious, or the people are deeply uncomfortable about religion, full stop. 2 things to note here. The first is the majority of developed nations are secular communities. That doesn't mean there are not large groups and large religious communities that operate within these countries, within these cities. Look at places like Germany, look at places like New Zealand, look at Australia. I think large groups of religious people exist. They have strong communities, they're oftentimes very tight-knit, oftentimes accepting. The fact that they want you to join, I think, is an important incentive to consider on our side of the house. Second thing to note here, they tend to indicate that lots of people are doomers, therefore they will want to talk to you. Firstly, there is no structural reason why lots of people are doomers. The motion says it is rising. I do not understand what that means. It is more predominant than religion is, considering religion has had like 300 years to develop. But secondly, notice, I think intuitively and structurally, I don't think people want to discuss nihilism. Oftentimes people are fundamentally scared to discuss fears that they have about society and anxieties of people that are not their closest friends. If you go on a Tinder date and they start talking about how the world is going to end, I think that generally inhibits your ability to form meaningful relationships, but also that means you have an incentive to wake up every morning. But not only that, I think the majority of religions in the world indicate incentivize you to do things that are preferable both for you and for other people. For example, doing things like engaging in gratification, being grateful for the things you have, saying things like grace when you have a meal. Comparatively, I don't think doomerism ever grants you those benefits. But secondly, I think the majority of religions do have guidance and community. Even if your local mosque has 6 people in it, the fact that there is an imam there guiding you through the journey and telling you things are going to be okay, and telling you there's a reward and a meaning to every action you entail in, I think means you gain guidance in a way that would never exist in the comparative. And I think the important thing to note here is crappy things are happening to you on either side of the house. Hurricanes are hitting you on either side, you're getting dumped on either side, Palestine is being bombed on either side of the house. The comparative is, A, how you feel like you personally contribute to it, and B, how you act in response to it. Under doomerism, you believe that A, there's nothing you can do, but B, you believe it really, really sucks. I think comparatively, the things religious people are able to do is believe there is a placebo effect in place. They believe they can pray and something good will happen. They believe when they see someone suffering, there's some way to end that. They believe that even if the world does end, which might be a belief held by both sides of the house, there's going to be something at the end of that, so there's meaning to waking up every morning. And notice by the very characterization we hear from opening opposition, the kind of things a young person cares about is settling down, is finding a family, is having tangible emotional fulfillment. And notice you can't do all those things to the point at which you believe there's no reason to do them. You can't do those things because on both sides of the house you take effort, and on our side you get an incentive to take part in that effort, on their side you don't. The other important thing I think that we should discuss here is on their side they say religions require you to have particular demographics or do particular things. I think firstly, we already explained to you why you're not going to opt into the most extreme ones. There's a choice mechanism, there's a proximity mechanism, there's the fact that oftentimes the most extreme ones are gate kept. But secondly, I think notice the kinds of things that that these religions inherently try to incentivize you to do are more beneficial than doomerism. Because the kinds of people that want you to be doomers have no incentive for you to stay. The Reddit platform where you discuss why everything sucks has no reason to make you feel good about yourself because they don't want you to stay, they don't care if you stay, they really don't give a crap about you or anything else for that matter. Comparatively, religion does. That means, even if it's actively harmful, they enable you to do the least harmful things for your life. They enable you to do things like tell you to get married as young as possible and have kids. And I think in a world that is incredibly stressful, those are the little kinds of things that make you happy. Even if on our side of the house, you are more likely to be able to have a child because you believe there's some function to that, seeing the laugh on that child's face, I think is a meaningful benefit you're able to co-opt that never exists in the comparative. Okay. I think we quite clearly win on self-fulfillment. Notice these arguments are logically prior to anything else in the debate because we explained to you why religion functions this way, why your psychology functions this way, why as a young person your characteristics are fundamentally likely to mean this is the path you should take at this particular point in your life. That means CG locked out the debate from vertical extensions. That means I don't think OO's claims on self-fulfillment still exist. Okay, on the social stuff. Their main social claim here was just, oh, You need more people to talk to. I already explained to you earlier in my speech why these are not the kinds of things you're talking to people about. Oftentimes because fears are deeply personal, oftentimes because you end up in cycles, but also because I explained to you are less likely to want to opt into social relationships in general. But secondly, I think, and insofar as you believe that other religious people exist, the level of connection you have with these people is likely to be more meaningful and deeper. Quality over quantity. Why it's likely to be true? Firstly, because I think religion is a far deeper change in your view of the world. It tells you exactly what the point is of being alive. That is an incredibly meaningful thing for someone to believe. It changes the way you open your eyes and you see things, like how you believe birds exist, not because they're robots sent by the Chinese government, but because you believe there's something sent as a gift to God to remind you it's going to be okay. When your dad dies, you don't just think, oh, the microplastics in the water are killing all of us. It tells you it was his time to go. He's in a better place. And if you believe their characterization that your own thoughts are the most fundamentally important thing, then your thoughts are better on our side of the house. Your actions are better, your thoughts are better, your relationships are deeper and more meaningful, and you do not steal grief from places you ought not to. Thank you. Clear OG win.
MC invests more than any other New Zealand law firm in courtroom training. It's where the senior litigators, King's Counsels, and judges of the future can learn their trade. That's why MC has invested in the country's only full-scale courtroom replica. Across the atrium, they have a full-scale replica of the High Court main courtroom in the High Court at Auckland. And that facility is used for litigation training. Many of you will have competed there in MOOCs in the past, I'm sure, and will be familiar with it. They also use it internally for expert witness training for their clients. I'd now like to invite up the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to continue the debate.
If this debate is going to be judged on how the average individual experiences their internal monologue, think about the sheer amount of anxiety that someone feels when they know that they can fail at life, when they know that if they do not meet the metrics of the religion that they describe, that it's not just your current life on the line, it is your eternal life, it is the life of all of those around you. Contrast that with doomerism, because you can get an immense amount of peace when you get the acceptance of knowing that nothing that you contribute can change the inevitability of the way the world is right now. On their side, you have to live with the anxiety of always being inadequate. On our side, we accept at the first instance that it is always going to be inadequate and that we must live for now rather than that hypothetical tomorrow. 3 things in the speech then. Firstly, just clarifying how this debate ought to be interpreted. Secondly, on how you derive most personal fulfillment out of doomerism. And then finally, why social interactions are inherently more meaningful when you have common ground to discuss. Firstly then, on interpretation. Firstly, just note that the religion that you join, by their own metric, is most likely to be the more predatory forms of religion, because mana gives you the analysis of you're a young adult, you're detaching from your family, you're going out into the world. And so that means that when a Mormon missionary comes to your door and love bombs you, you're more susceptible to that kind of messaging than you are to more mainstream religions. So they've knifed themselves there, and that they must stand by more extreme forms of religion that a young adult will pray to, because they've given us the analysis of why you're naive and less able to, settle for something that is a little bit less extreme. But secondly, even if it is something that is more mainstream, it is likely to be a religion that is present in society. And note by it being a secular society, that's more likely to be Christianity. So they also have to cop all of the sexism and racism undertones that come from the Bible, that is the scripture that you're basing your life upon. Secondly, how do you feel this religion as an individual? Note, both sides have human instincts, right? So we think that on both sides you feel an inherent love for others. You feel the desire to have children. Some people feel that you feel like, happy when vitamin D is being absorbed into your veins through the sun. And so that means that it's not the comparative on their side of that we have to stand by with doomerism, where you just hate your life and everything is great and nothing. It is about the way in which you view the world. And so you still get those dopamine hits, but you think that you should prioritize getting those dopamine hits immediately because the future is not guaranteed, versus, oh, I should, sacrifice my immediate pleasure for some hypothetical pleasure in the future. So that means that on their side, they cannot claim that doomerism means that you inherently have less fulfillment. They must provide mechanization. Finally then, how do you discuss this life philosophy? And this is where we provide a huge amount of material in this debate. Firstly, you must be comparative, and it is inherently more neutral to discuss doomerism than it is religion, because in secular societies people view religion as inherently political, so they're less likely to want to engage in those conversations. It makes you feel uncomfortable to discuss those kinds of beliefs. Whereas when you're sharing a meme about doomerism and the fact that the bees are all dying, that is something that any person can engage in a conversation about. It means that you have an infinitely wider number of people that you can have very deep conversations with, and so that means that, like, prima facie we've won the debate. Secondly though, be comparative on the way that you explain your life philosophy, because in order to enter those deep conversations with others, you have to explain the way you think about the world. If you approach a conversation and you're explaining your life philosophy from the scripture perspective, that is something that A, is at the very least inaccessible to someone else who is your friend already, or B, just very likely to turn them off. And that means that on their side you are more likely to turn away the friends that you currently have, whereas doomerism is something that you can easily explain to others, and it's not something that you have to spend a long amount of time, getting them a copy of the Book of Mormon or something. So, two contributions that we gave you at OO then. Firstly, on personal fulfillment. They claim that you always feel paralyzed by doomerism, but two reasons why that is not true. Firstly, because as I explained in my introduction, it comes with a degree of acceptance. Because the comparative is that on their side, yes, you have a goal to work towards, but that is a goal that has huge amounts of livelihood for yourself on the line. Because if you do not achieve that goal under religion, if you do not jump through all of the hoops, you are denied eternal life, or there are some, catastrophic consequences. Whereas on our side, at the very least, people accept that those dramatic consequences are inevitable, and nothing you personally do can change that. But secondly, religious hope equally creates religious fear, which means on their side you're much more likely to be afraid of your consequences of your actions and think about that before you think about the way that you interact with the world. I'll take OG.
By your own characterization, the thing you ought to care about most in the debate is your thoughts. We spend most time with them. Over 2 billion people in the world are religious to some extent. Do you think they all live in debilitating anxiety and choose not to do anything in life because the fears are so overwhelming? Or do you think they find fulfillment in a meaningful way?
They live with anxiety, and they feel like maybe they're told to feel fulfilled by that anxiety, but the fact remains that that is anxiety, and that is very crushing. And so that means that even if you believe that that can be fulfilling, we say be comparative here. You're much more likely to feel fulfilled if you do not have that base level of anxiety. You can accept that nothing that you personally do will change the world. Turning now to why it is easier to personally access this. Note that even if you think that someone is going to derive a large amount of personal experience from the way that they process their own thoughts, you should judge the debate based on which is most easy to access. Because on their side, you get a large degree of personal fulfillment when you feel the most religious and you feel the most connected to that religion. That involves a huge time commitment of reading the scripture, of learning all of the rules and learning all of the aspects of that religion, and that inherently isn't accessible. Like if you can't read, if you can't, access a house of worship, that is something that you can necessarily not get to that high extent of connection. Whereas, contrast doomerism, any single person can access a meme that, it doesn't even have to have text associated with it. You can listen to a video about how funny it is that the environment is never going to change, or that politicians are always in it for themselves. You can prima facie get enjoyment out of that, even if it is not something that you can change. But note also that we think that you should judge this debate based on how you accept yourself. This young adult could be any race, any class, any creed, a woman. In religion, you're much more likely to judge yourself or hate parts of yourself that you cannot change because you do not fit with the idealized version of that religion. And so note that the framing that Amelia provided to you, that religions inherently have lots of social rules that you must meet in order to culturally fit in with that group. And so that means on their side, you're much more likely to hate yourself, even if it is not rational. Finally then, on social interaction and fulfillment, we tell you that you're much more likely to have deep interactions because you're much more likely to have more people to discuss with. Even if on their side you can get interactions with people that are part of that religion already, those are people that are part of that religion already. So in order to have a deep relationship with them, you detach from the current community that you have that is more likely to have your best interests at heart. Even if a Mormon missionary love bombs you in the first 5 minutes that you know them, that is not someone who cares about you for the rest of your life. That is someone that just wants to convert you to that religion. It's far better to keep your current friends.
Well, as you walked in here, I'm sure you noticed that this isn't an office space like a lot of other office spaces. Not only has this building won many, many awards for workplace environment, many other very notable awards such as that, but the lifetime terrariums that you see when you walk in, office space for contemplation, creativity, informal or formal meetings, and to be really immersed in the restorative effects of nature throughout the working day. And I think that's why they're so effective in transforming the office from a place where you can do work into a place that's inspired by the native forests of New Zealand, the Waitakere Ranges, where the climate in here is noticeably cooler and more pleasant to work in. And with that said, I'd like to invite up the government member.
I think at this point in the debate it is quite clear that community is something that is important to people, that people are necessarily going to have to engage with in order to get social connections and in order to meet that requirement of the human condition. And the extension from CG is very simple, which is that the community that you join is far more toxic to yourself, but also is far less politically palatable to people who don't subscribe to a doomerist ideology, as opposed to just simply joining a religion in a secular community. And this explains that you get far more self-fulfillment by being around people who are more positive under the government side, but it also explains that you are able to access a much wider range of people and are able to get greater fulfillment from that. So, firstly, in the speech, going to give those extensions, then going to engage with OO. Cool. The first thing I will note is that the analysis I'm about to give you is far less extreme than the opening government case, which is asserts that people aren't going to achieve their goals because they had no reason to get out of bed. If you believe that people still have incentives to go to work because they need money to eat, our analysis is still going to explain that doomerism is incredibly harmful to you in terms of not having motivations that run into the long term, and also in terms of being around people that demotivate you and give the mechanisms that this team does not give in terms of why you are going to be less motivated into the future. So let's explain what this community that you associate with looks like and why it is deeply problematic internally and externally. In terms of internally, obviously this is a community of other people who subscribe to this doomerist belief, who are incredibly radical and believe things like hurricanes are going to mean that we are all going to be dead in 50 years from climate change, believe that there is no possible way that we're able to build seawalls to protect ourselves, who believe that the status quo in a capitalist society means that necessarily we are going to get all of these problems. Those are people who are incredibly radical and who do not believe that the way society currently acts is something which allows for society to continue into the long run. But obviously the vast majority of people do not believe that. As opening government tell you, just because this is something that is increasing in popularity does not mean that it is something that the majority of people believe in. But obviously, just look at every election in most countries. Clearly, most people are not subscribing to this doomerist nature that society is doomed unless we fundamentally alter our practice. And what this explains is that when you join this doomerist movement, the types of beliefs that you surround yourselves with in this echo chamber are the types of beliefs that make it a lot harder for you to engage with people who do not already have this idea, which co-opts the impacts that opening opposition give you in terms of why you need a community and in terms of the benefit of having a diverse community of people to explain to. But it also explains why you are far less likely to be able to achieve success in the world, because you don't want to engage with the status quo, because you believe that the status quo is something which is inherently harmful, because you believe that if you decide to get an education and to go into the corporate world, then you are contributing towards this inherently harmful system. It means that you are far less likely to do things that are going to provide you with success in the status quo that is unlikely to be changing for the reasons we gave prior about how most people do not subscribe to this nature. And that explains that you have far less success. The other thing I would note is that obviously you have far less long-term planning. And this is important because it gets to the impacts that opening government want to claim about people having less motivation. But it is far more believable because it explains that while people might still get out of bed, people are far less likely to want to do things like put money in a savings account to try and eventually own a home if they believe that socioeconomic inequality is going to get worse and worse and they are never going to be able to afford that home. It means that people are far more likely under our side to want to do things like be willing to bring a child into the world, to do things that bring joy, to want to engage in long-term relationships. And that's because of the mechanism that opening government do not give you, which is to say that obviously when you believe in the doomerism mindset, it is not just a mindset, but it is a fundamental belief that society is doomed and that society is not going to recover unless people entirely change. The impact of that is very clear. It means that you have a far less fulfilling world. It means you are unlikely to do things that don't prioritize your short-term needs because you don't believe that because under our side you believe that there is actually a future that you need to prepare for and that it is worth investing in. The other thing I would note though is that the community that you join is far more toxic internally under their side, and that's because these other people around you also have this low motivation. These other people around you also have this incredibly sad attitudes toward life. They pass on their melancholy onto you, and that means that the people that you are talking to are incredibly sad. And because of the analysis that we gave prior about how this is not a common ideology, that means that it is far harder to engage with people that don't share this ideology. That means that the vast majority of people that you are surrounding yourself with are going to be these doomerist people that do make you sad, that don't have hope and optimism, and mean that you don't have people who you're able to talk about your struggles with and you're able to get support from. Yes.
Being a doomer does not require you to join a community and only talk to those people who share beliefs with you, whereas religion does require you to do that. How then do you get better social interactions when being religious does limit the number of people that you can discuss your ideas with?
Sure, two things. Secondly, I will directly respond to your claims on the religions that you join and explain why you join good religions that don't isolate you. But the first thing I would note is that obviously we did give you analysis as to why you're far less likely to be able to engage with other people that don't share this doomerist philosophy, because it is incredibly radical and most people don't believe this and don't want to engage with you because you are sad, you are melancholic, and you don't bring joy to their life. Let's talk about the religion that you are likely to join and why it is not what opening opposition says. Obviously, this debate presumes that you are not currently religious because you are making a choice to enter religion. And that explains that you likely don't have family pressures, otherwise they would have already made you be that religion. And the Scientologists that Melissa is so scared of, they have been targeting you for years, and clearly their advertisements and their campaigns have not already worked, otherwise you already would have, against your will, joined that religion. And that explains that you are able to pick the religion that is best for you. So if you are someone who is from a minority community, you're able to join a religion that is more supportive of that community. If you are deaf, you are able to pick a religion that is supportive of that. And if you are in a region with few people of a certain religion, then you wouldn't join that one in order to get a large amount of community. For those reasons, you should believe that you are far more fulfilled within this community and external to this community under side government.
Thank you for that excellent speech. We're going to change pace a little bit now and talk about our society. So I just want to talk a little bit about the history of the University of Auckland Debating Society that was founded in 1887. And as we say often, as many of you will know, the oldest society currently on campus. Our first debate was chaired by Sir Maurice O'Rourke on July 29, 1887. The topic of the debate was the payment of members of the House of Representatives is in the best interest of New Zealand. A question that I ask myself often to this day. So to continue the debate, I'd like to invite up the opposition member to their speech.
He's on the panel, isn't he? Okay. This debate until this speech seems to be about, do you prefer religion or do you prefer hating the world? But doomerism is more than that, it's an extreme ideology. What I think government ignores about this debate is that you still have that existential anxiety that am I going to grow up and be okay in the world? The problem is that you're far more likely to bowl it down, you're far more likely to ignore it, and then when that explodes and you're an adult and you have a midlife crisis, that is far more worse for you as an individual. That is something that Closing Opposition seeks to solve, and is by far the most important contribution in this debate because it is actually related to the motion and it is comparative. What I'm going to do to you in this speech is I'm going to first explain why young people today are in a uniquely bad position that needs saving. Then I'm going to explain why current support levels are not enough and why that's solved by this motion. And then thirdly, how we get that support on side Closing Opposition. The first point, why is this actor likely to be in a very bad spot? Firstly, because you live in a secular society, which empirically is more likely to be developed, but also is structurally more likely to be a developed nation, for the reason that these sort of countries have moved away from the community function which religion provides through suburbs, through work, through the internet, through politics, which have replaced that. Taking that assumption as likely, which is also something that they never concede down the government bench, and therefore I think you're wise to assume it, therefore I'm going to explain what that uniquely means to this actor. A, it means that there are less religious communities, which is something that O asserts, which we proved to you just now. But B, it means that you are likely to be online a lot, because if you're a developed nation, then you have access to information because you have the money to afford it, which combined with algorithms on TikTok or YouTube or the news, which are far more likely to put doomerism narratives in front of you anyway, like for example, look at the current coverage around Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton in the United States. Look at, for example, the doomerism that surrounds climate change in countries like Europe, for example. C, you're far more likely to be mentally ill in the developed world, for the reason that the world does suck, but also that generally economics correlates with development. The second thing about this actor to note is that you are young, which means A, you're far more likely to be mentally ill again, empirically true, but B, you're far more likely to be online more often because you grew up in that generation and you're used to that technology. But 3, you're structurally more likely to be fucked over and know it, because climate change is going to destroy the world one day. Your housing and wealth will never be passed on to you because boomers don't fucking die and we can never afford a house. But 3, you're locked out of the workforce because, again, boomers aren't dying, they're not leaving the workforce, they're not retiring, and countries are extending their retirement age. Look at France recently. But 4thly, you're likely to be infertile, or at least more likely to be infertile as you grow up because of the science, which means you're locked out of having a family long term. Why is this a problem that needs solving? 1, because you're unlikely to have a network or support network that's able to understand the exact problems that you're going through. For example, your parents don't understand what it's like to be able to afford a house, or never likely to be fertile, or never likely to have wealth in your life, or likely to be mentally ill, because that is something that was stigmatized back then, but is also something that they never grew up with, which explains why they aren't the person that's helping you, which fills in the logical gap that old misses that our government relies on being there. But secondly, you're unlikely to be able to find immediate support from those around you, because as government concedes, people don't want to talk about this stuff because it's fucking depressing, which explains why you bottle it down, you don't talk about it, and then you don't find ways to solve it, you don't find ways to actually cope and learn those mechanisms. But thirdly, you're unlikely to find solutions in religion, because hierarchy in religion means that it's taught by old people who aren't likely to care about it. But also, these people think they're being saved, right? Which explains why they don't care about it, they don't have time talking about it. Why this matters. Firstly, because if you don't go to doomerism now, then you're never going to come to terms with this narrative. You're never going to find ways to deal with it. But secondly, because like you can't escape the news, and like I don't know, you pray to God every night thinking that He might have your back one day, but then another Karen Kane hits and you feel like you're being lost. That's extra damage to your psyche, but also explains why you're in a uniquely vulnerable position. Now I'm going to explain why we solve this, but before I move on, I'll take one from opening.
Okay, doomerism, as you say, spans from the internet and is relatively newcoming. Things on the internet and trends and beliefs tend to change quite quickly, unlike religion. Do you not think that 40 years down the line, maybe if the environment is fixed, or maybe hurricanes have decreased in their likelihood of occurrence, do you not think you would then have to reckon with this ideology later in life in a system that is less old and has less ability to support you like religion does?
Firstly, you're less likely to reckon with it but because people don't talk about it. But secondly, I think that when at the point you turn to religion and then you find that like cognitive dissonance that you will be saved, but then every single time you open the news, you suddenly get that shock, pain in the back of your head that you are likely to be fucked. That is extremely bad. What is the harm of that? Firstly, you go through every single day ignoring your problems, and then you have a crisis at one point in your life which makes you feel lost in the world, which makes you feel like God has abandoned you, which people around you can't understand, which leads to the kind of self-harm, which leads to the kind of self-hatred that people feel like when they feel like they're ignoring their problems for a long time. But secondly, for people who are particularly mentally ill, I think that even if you do turn to religion, and here's where the framing at the beginning of my speech matters, it's like, you know, you just won't be able to cope with it. You won't be able to understand why God has left you this way. You won't be able to deal with that anxiety. I think that, now I'm going to explain why we solve this and why this, and I think I've already hinted at this most important thing in the debate. Why is this done? What are you likely to do? The first thing you might do is you might spiral early. In the short term, I think that government concedes potentially the harm, which is that you live worse, you don't go outside, you don't eat for some days, you think that the world sucks, you might be crying a lot. I think that lots of people are prone to do this because people are human, people do these kind of things already, but also anxiety is something that's quite hard to deal with, especially with the lack of access to things like psychiatrists throughout the developed world. What is the benefit then? Firstly, you're more likely to act openly, you're more likely to act honestly, which means that you bridge that empathy gap with the older people in your life, because they might not understand the exact pains you're going through, but they're far more likely to understand.
Engage religion, wanting to join that religion. I think that doesn't engage with the fact that religion is not necessarily as anxiety fulfilling as the fact that the end of the world is coming in like 40 years. I think that's far greater anxiety for a person. Lastly, then we heard from opening the opposition that there's a huge time commitments for being part of religion, and comparatively when you're in a doomerism community, you have lots of time. Firstly, I think it's not as huge as they say. I think religion, you engage with the fact that you have other communities, you don't have to do everything for your religion, you do the things that you feel like will get you the most satisfaction. But secondly, we think time commitments are good, offers the ability to find purpose, receive that community, you're actively engaging with the religious community, you're achieving communities. And thirdly, I think people accept you when you are learning this community, and you can achieve a community because you are trying your hardest, you're engaging with this community, which I think the time commitment is greatly outweighed. Then secondly, what do the closing opposition say? Basically, we heard this idea that doomerism is true, doomerism is good, which is why we should prepare people for the fact that they will face it and that climate change will kill them in the future. Look, I think the main response here is that the government has incentive to solve and to mitigate doomerism and to sort of reduce its impacts on people. What this means then is it's unlikely to happen in your lifetime. Yes, you may face hurricanes, but the ability for governments and other organisations to support you in this ability means that there's a large incentive to avoid the societal doom, which means what that basically means that it explains the benefits that you need to cope is not important for the fact that it's unlikely to happen in your world, which means the benefits that the closing opposition tries to prove isn't as big because it's something that doesn't really matter in today's debate. At the end of this, what that means then is you're likely to find self-fulfillment when you follow the religious life. Secondly then, on community. What do we hear from opening opposition? We heard that it's easier to explain doomerism so you don't disengage with friends. I think Rob came up here and gave some good responses for the fact that firstly, the vast majority of people don't engage in the community, they don't necessarily have that huge connection to opposition wants to say. But secondly, I think they're likely to engage in extremist views because of the echo chambers that are created from this doomer sort of incentive for the fact that they're probably a smaller community that's growing. That means that if you're not an extremist, you're perceived to be, even if you're not an extremist within this community, you're perceived to be that. What that means then is you're likely to ostracize people within the general community, unlikely to get the big benefits that opening opposition wants to prove. But thirdly, you're less likely to engage in the status quo because it's seen as being passive to the current system. What that means then is you're unlikely to engage with people who are in the current system, you're unlikely to make friends because you feel like you're complicit in the doomerist system. What that means then is community is greatly reduced when you follow that sort of doomerist perspective. Secondly, then they have this ability that it's your greater ability to engage with Doomerist communities because you can send like memes. It's like easier for people to engage with. Firstly, I think there's less incentive to engage with the communities for the fact that you're unlikely to be here in the future, so you don't need to necessarily work for those relationships because they're not as important. But secondly, other people in the community have this sad sort of outlook on life, which means the ability to make fulfilling and like happy relationships is greatly reduced for the fact that people you engage with are the ones who think are pessimistic. There's no point in making these relationships, which means the extent that you get these relationships is greatly reduced. Fourthly, then we heard the fact that people just want to convert to religion, so you're unlikely to have deep connections. I think when you're in a religion, the connections you make are quite deep because you have that religious connection. You want to be part of that community. You're actively engaging and trying to make that friends. And it's not true that everybody just wants to indoctrinate you. The impact of this, then, is you're less likely to have connections within the Doomerist community for the reasons I gave, but also you're less likely to have that long-term planning, which we think is really important. Ability to invest in long-term firms, the ability to make families, the ability to engage with friendships, which we get when you follow a religious community. Lastly, then, on why we beat opposition. I think there's two main reasons. Firstly, I think the analysis we give you explains why you're less likely to get that social support when you're in that religious community. But secondly, I think the motivation is mechanized by the long-term impacts we give you, the ability to plan your life in the future. I think that's highly beneficial. That's something the opening government did not engage with. For those reasons, you should give it to us.
Thank you, Joe. That was excellent. As we come to the end of the evening, I just want to reflect on some of the success that we've had this year, and it's been a great year for the society. See, we retained the joint scroll, which was excellent. Also made it to the finals of Officers' Cup, another great achievement. And more recently, I had the pleasure of attending Clubs Awards, in which we were named the Law Club of the Year. So I think that in every area of engagement, whether it's with community, whether it's its members, society has done an excellent job, and I hope to see this carry on to the future. So I'd like to now invite up the opposition whip to close out the debate. Thank you.
It's incredibly clear that on either side you still have the same fears of what is going to happen in the world. The only difference on either side is how you react to those fears. So, firstly, I'll go over our extension. Secondly, how we go over OG. Thirdly, CG. Fourthly, OO. Alright, firstly, our extension. Just because it largely wasn't responded to by Joe, so why are you likely to get help on our side? Firstly, people are looking out for you because you are doom spiraling. Like, you still have those people who are looking out for you. As a young person, you are increasingly seeking out connection. You still have your connection from when you were like a teenager. You still have lots of people looking out for you. These people care about you and want to stop you from doom spiraling. Secondly, people see this doom spiraling as harmful because they see it as like those weird Reddit groups. They want to stop you from getting onto those weird Reddit groups because they don't want to lose their friend. That means that people are actively going out and trying to make sure that you don't spiral further. Thirdly, we tell you that they provide actionable techniques. This looks like your friend actively like helping you and being like, look, this is what I do when I get really anxious. This is how I cope with it. It helps you find more techniques that are more applicable for you. Fourthly, I also tell you that it is quite relatable, right? Like, even if your friends do not have the same level of anxiety around it as you do, even if they are not like fully doomerists, they are still have those same concerns. They still have those same concerns about the housing crisis. They still have those same concerns about like climate. They still have these same concerns. So even if they're not to the same level as you, they still find your worries relatable. They still find ways to connect with you and to try and help you out of that. Again, going back to those techniques that James told you about. This is really important because what is on the comparative is that religion tells you to sort it out yourself through prayer. They say God will support you. All you need to do is pray. This is actually just like not very helpful for when you have anxiety and you're having a panic attack and you're trying to just pray out of it, because when that doesn't work, what do you do, right? Because when you turn to religion and it doesn't help you, what do you do? Because on either side, this philosophy is likely to fail you, but when you have it on religion, your entire foundation is shaken up. When it is doomerism, you feel comforted by your friends, by your family. So, Firstly, how do we go over OG? They claim that because you believe in something bigger than yourself, you are happier. They say that the outcome of like doomerism is that you just don't get out of bed. Look, OO has already said that you get anxiety about yourself, right? That is a great anxiety. CG said that this is quite extreme. You should still believe both of those things, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide 4 unique responses. Firstly, I tell you, again, like I said at the start of my speech, you're still very afraid of current events. You're still very afraid of things like climate change. When you are buying into those values of like, you should have a child to be happy, you still are afraid for that child then because you know that they're going to grow up in a place where, with climate change, they're going to grow up in a world where you know there's less likely to get a house. All these things still apply, and that anxiety transfers over to your child. What I then also tell you is that you have this anxiety about your friends and family. There's also a response to the material about community that a lot of people have discussed, and that because you have this anxiety about your friends and family, you go and you try to convert them. You try to get them to pray with you. You try to get them to also convert to this religion because that is how you have found your salvation, and you want that salvation for them as well. Because when you are facing a terrible world on either side, but you believe in something greater, you also try to get the people around you to believe in something greater. But when that is something that your family and friends just do not want to believe in because they are queer, because they are women, because they are people of color and cannot relate to that philosophy, that means that you are locking out that support system, you are locking out those friends, and you're isolating yourself to only the religious community. Thirdly, this breaks the deadlock about social connection because you are cutting your ties with the people around you because you are actively trying to convert them, and unless they want to convert as well, you are going to lose them. Fourthly, I tell you these values can be like inherently harmful because when you are incredibly mentally ill, like James tells you, and people tell you to just pray it away, obviously that's not going to help like the dopamine receptors in your brain actually get happy, right? That means that you don't actually get fulfillment out of it. All you get is maybe God will look out for me. When you are told that children is what makes you happy, but you are infertile, but you are queer, you can't like, because of all these different reasons that you cannot biologically have a child, that makes you really upset that you cannot buy into this, that really harms you. I'll take a few from opening.
Okay, clearly all your conversations are not dictated by your fundamental belief, you have other conversations. What do you think helps a person more when getting through something? You're scared either way. The belief that an omnipresent being is going to save you when it's happening for a reason, or fucking therapy, which is the white man with a diploma telling you, just breathe it out. One is a far deeper belief. Can you please engage in reckoning with one of the deepest moments of fear that gets you through it, the other doesn't?
In the deepest moments of fear, in the truly deepest moments of fear, you are afraid in your own philosophy. You are afraid in that religion. You are afraid in your beliefs of nihilism. And in the circumstance of you're afraid of religion, that means that you are having a crisis of faith because everything that you have invested your time into, what if it doesn't get you out on the other end? Because in those deepest moments of fear that Mana tells you about, that is when you have your crisis of faith. But on our side, when you do have a crisis of, oh, maybe everything isn't doom and gloom, maybe there is something I can do, that's when you go out and you join a protest. That's when you go out and you talk to your friends. But the thing is that when you are the most afraid on their side, you don't buy into this idea of an afterlife because you cannot ever be truly sure. Alright, secondly, on CG, they tell you two things. Firstly, doomerism is a toxic environment, and secondly, it means that they invest in future and religion. Firstly, I tell you that doomerism can look like things just like TikToks, right? You have people to stop you from going to the furthest ends. Secondly, they also try to tell you that because you invest in your future. But I tell you that when you do try to invest in religion, what your leaders are telling you is that if you invest in religion, you invest in your future. So then it looks like instead of putting savings into a house, that looks like putting money into the church and trusting that God will help you on the other side. Because that is what is being told to you. That is incredibly important because it just negates all of their benefits if you buy what OG tells you about how like donating money to the church makes you feel good. So that like either way, one team loses. Alright? So how do we help with doomerism? Firstly, they tell you that doomerism is unlikely to happen in your time. Firstly, I tell you that this ignores an accurate analysis that we've told you, and that like this is something that you're quite afraid about. Secondly, they tell you that there are government incentives to avoid dooming. Alright, firstly, just flip this, right? That means that you don't spiral on our side, you don't get that afraid, right? But it's still easier for the government to step in with things like therapists, because when you do step in, it means that when you are doom spiraling, that's when people are concerned about you, they reach out for help for you, you get connected to a therapist, that is a government incentive to help you on our side, not on theirs. But secondly, I also just tell you this is quite assertive, like there are so many people like in the US, the government just does not care. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for an excellent, high-quality debate. I had a hard time distinguishing who are the pros and who are the ands. Did you have anything else you wanted to make?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, if anything, I've left this debate feeling a lot more positive rather than doomeristic about the world. I think the future is bright.
Yeah. No, thank you, everyone, for attending. What I believe happens now, and I'll work with the panel, so let's shake their heads if I'm giving false information, is that the judgment will be reserved until prize giving next week. Fantastic. So I think that brings this evening to a close. Ka kite anō, everyone. Good evening.
And thank you to our lovely
minutes of
MCs.
more mingling.